On page 64 of our textbook, less than half, the paragraph that starts less than half the page down, excuse me, I keep stuttering, the author relays the story of a young artist asking Paul Gauguin how to paint the tree. And if you haven't gotten there, get there, because this is the artist he's talking to. This guy named Paul Sérusier. And I'm showing you this work and talking about these guys because they were wildly influential in the French scene, and it's a part of art practice that's often overlooked. The fact that artists and designers work very closely together. And so this group, the Nabis, was a group of young artists. Most of them were painters. However, as the painting market got flooded, so to speak, for that time period in that city, a lot of artists began to incorporate other artistic practices into their working. And so the Nabis was one of those. So you have a group of artists. I'm showing you only paintings at this point. Sadly, there's not a lot of really solid documentation of their design work, but it does exist, and I hope that at some point you'll be able to see them, because they're really quite beautiful things. And for those of you who understand what the term Art Nouveau means, these guys kind of float in and out. They're like a little bit before Art Nouveau, but they're bringing up some things that will then develop into Art Nouveau. So the Nabis in 1888 were a group of painters, as I said, and this group of painters, they did the things that the Impressionists told them to do, or made popular, which was go outside, paint from nature, paint what you see, and use immediately available colors, pretty much. So what the Impressionists would do is they would go out with just a very small spectrum of colors in these new things called tubes of paint. And they look like tubes of toothpaste, right? I'm sure some of you have seen these things in art supply stores or even at a craft store. And so they had these tubes of paint for the first time, which is a big reason why you could paint outside. And I say for the first time, meaning like 1850. So after 1850-ish, we had paint in tubes, and so artists would go outside. And in the case of Paul Sérusier, he went out on a little walk through the landscape with Gauguin, who was a mentor and a friend, and a few other painters, and he was painting on the back of just some card stock, so just some cardboard, effectively. But by this point, so the Impressionists had this tiny spectrum of colors. By this point, a lot of colors were being put in tubes of paint, and so they had a wide variety, and so they basically could just take whatever they wanted to. They also were trained in mixing things, which most artists today are as well. And so what the story that Gompertz relays in here, I'm not sure if his telling is right or if the one that I heard was right, but pretty much Gauguin was just like, go for it. Like, do whatever you want to do. You see that tree in blue, you then paint it in blue. And I'm talking about these long spindles here. They represent birch trees. And so what was white has the faintest blue tint to it because you have light hitting the surface of the water, which is right here. I hope you can see this. The lower half. This area. Ooh, look at that. That area is water. And these things are birch trees. And so these birch trees are reflected blue. And so Sérusier sees blue. And so he paints them blue on the advice of Paul Gauguin. But he wasn't alone in having this inspiration of just painting it as you see it kind of thing, which again comes from painting outside. It is a cultural tradition that is handed down from the Impressionists to these younger people. This is actually 2 generations removed, because you have the Impressionists, then you have Paul Gauguin, who's a post-Impressionist, and then you have this Nabis, which are very, very young people, and their careers develop over the next 15 years. So a lot of their big stuff comes from the after the turn of the century. There we go. Edouard Vuillard. There's a lot of names here that I know sound the same. I've talked about Ambroise Voillard. I've talked about here's another V name, right? Edouard Vuillard's portrait of the artist's mother and sister in the studio is an artist capturing what he sees in front of him. And here he is transfixed by the mashing of pattern between his sister's plaid dress and the wallpaper of his studio, but also then this monolithic figure of his mother who sits there with all of this gravity of the mourning cloak of the day. You know, she is a woman who has been widowed, and because of that she wears black and will wear black for the remainder of her life. That's the way the traditions did it back then. And so she was this central figure that the studio seemed to kind of move around her. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is look at the way that perspective is dealt with. That dresser that is behind the mother looks as though it can start sliding down the floor, because the floor seems actually to be kind of tipped up, right? So the dresser would be back here, sister would be here, mother would be here, right? So dresser is back here, dresser is back here, mom's down here, sister's on the side. That's a trick that it was loosely inspired by Gauguin's impulse to press things together, but it's actually something that Gustave Courbet and Edouard Manet did much better than, and actually Mary Cassatt was wonderful at this trick, this painterly trick. So this is about the compression of space. It's about pattern making. It's about following your gut with making the image look the way you want it to look. This palette is kind of grimy. It's not the most visually settling image, right? It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be this, you're in his studio, so you're in this space that for him is very private, it's very insular, and his family is there, and so it's even more insular because of the network of his family, but then they're in his space and not their own. So it is this kind of like mashed together life. And the fact that his sister is leaning over is also, for me as a viewer, just kind of nuts. Like, what is she doing? Why is she leaning over? Why did he ask her to lean like that? The only possible guess that I can put forward is that this is actually painted from a photograph. He took a photograph of sister and mom in his studio, and she is knelt down so as to be in the frame. But that said, those kinds of cameras did not really exist in a lot of people's hands. I mean, Kodak was around in the 1880s, so there's a chance that he had a Kodak camera, but a camera with the viewfinder. I actually don't know that much about Vuillard's life, specifically his relationship to photography, but I think it's a very interesting thing to try and figure out when I look at this canvas. What's the point of her bending over? It's the biggest. There's lots of questions, but that for me is the biggest one. Then we're back to Paul Sérusier. The painting that I showed you in the beginning, here it is again. It's Sérusier's Le Talisman, or The Talisman. The reason why it's called The Talisman, and a talisman is this kind of this thing that holds a ritual authority. In early Christian ceremonies, it was actually the cross was thought of to be similar to a talisman, but if you look at Christian doctrine, they say you can't have things like talisman because they're false idols. A talisman does imply some sort of idol worship. And when the Nabi and the group of people around Sérusier saw this work in 1888, they were blown away. They loved this work. They wanted to see more of it, and he never really produced many more good works that were of this caliber. He was kind of a sleeper hit, or not a sleeper hit, a one-hit wonder, which was sad. But this work it's in Paris, so if you're ever in Paris, it's at the Musée d'Orsay. It's very little. It's like that big, so like tinier than a sheet of paper. Beautiful, beautiful thing. But this work, it was so inspiring to these other artists because they had not seen something like this before. They had not seen this free association of color, but yet an earnest understanding of how the landscape was actually shaped. He was looking at the landscape. This wasn't a memory. He wasn't making this like idyllic landscape back in his Paris studio. He's in the thick of it. He's in the forest, and he's doing it there. That was powerful for these guys, and so they collectively titled it Le Talisman. Pierre Bonnard is here's his self-portrait from 1889. Bonnard is one of the youngest painters that there's going to be a few people who are younger than he that we're going to talk about over the course of our semester, but he's really young. He's like 21 when he made this painting, and he's following in suit with painting traditions of the day, but he's very good at it. And I'm closing today's lecture with this work because Pierre Bonnard becomes kind of a powerhouse. He's in French painting of this day. He's very inspirational to a lot of younger artists. He has a very long career, and it's marked by his ownership of this kind of painting so quickly. At 21, here he is holding paintbrushes like this. He's got a palette. I'm going to use our textbook and a pen. I'm a historian. He's a painter. So I've got my utensil and my material. He has his. And here he is just confidently conveying himself as a painter. He's like, yes, I'm young, but here I am, self-portrait as artist. This is a tradition that goes back through Western history of painting. Lots and lots and lots of very important painters painted self-portraits as artists. It was kind of a calling card. The way that a lot of people, when they self-publish business cards, will put themselves like behind a camera to show that they're a photographer. If you say you're a photographer, you're just a photographer, right? You don't need to double up on those things, but in this day and age you did. And so he's very confidently saying, I own this kind of painting style. I am good at this kind of painting style, and I'm going to do this for a long time. Now, I'm not going to bring up Pierre Bonnard that much over the course of our next term because he's a guy who's very, very, very good. But there's other people that are more radical, and so I am going to be focusing on the radical works more than these like masters of painting. But as a historian, I will say that the three guys that I mentioned today that are my favorites, we have this guy, Bonnard, this guy, and where are they? This guy, Gustave Caban. Love him. So good. All right, that's that. Take the quiz, and the other lecture will be coming up later today. So, 2 lectures this week.